Hey, it's Lara back with your horoscopes for the Capricorn Full Moon on July 13th, 2022. Thanks for being here. So it's been a hot minute, but I'm back in plenty of time to give you these horoscopes prior to that full moon that we have at 21 degrees of Capricorn on July 13th. And as we may or may not know, depending on, your sort of astrological savvy, full moons are culmination points. They're turning points. They are crescendos, where things come to light or revelations happen. Sometimes there are endings and releases that happen at full moons. And this full moon in Capricorn is no exception. So we're going to get into all the details of that. This horoscope will be relevant for the whole 2 weeks of that waning half of the moon cycle, from full moon to the next new moon that we have in Leo, which happens on July 28th. And of course, I'll be back with the horoscopes for that. And you can find me on my website at astrologymaven.com, where you can get information about what I do. And if you're looking at getting a bit of a foundation to help you understand what you're listening to when you listen to these horoscopes or somebody else's horoscopes, I have a course over there that's an on-demand course, and it is called Birth Chart Basics. And it talks about how to get an accurate and free birth chart online. Accurate is really important. It talks about what you can do if you don't know your birth time. And it also gives you some insight into the origins of astrology in general and birth charts and why we study them and what they're good for. And it gives you the basics of, what you're looking at when you look at your chart so that you can have a better grasp and get deeper insights from these horoscopes. So you can check that out over on my website, and I'll link that below. So let's dive into the full moon, and I'm going to give you all the details, and then we're going to go through the horoscopes for all 12 signs. So stick around for that. This full moon is happening at 21 degrees and 21 minutes of the sign of Capricorn. And it is in a conjunction with Pluto that's sitting at 27 degrees of Capricorn. So not an exact conjunction, but close enough, especially when we're talking about a heavy hitting outer planet like Pluto. So we're going to bring that into the story here. And the other thing is of course, at all full moons, we've got the sun and the moon opposite each other in the sky, right? That's what a full moon is, where the sun is in one sign and house in your chart, and the moon is in the opposite area. And the moon is reflecting fully the light of the sun. That's why full moons are associated with, this concept of revelation or illumination of things coming to light, because we have the moon fully reflecting the light of the sun. And we also have these two luminaries in opposition to each other. So there can be a bit of sort of facing off or need for compromise or tension, that needs to be kind of resolved by a balancing or coming together in some way. So we also know that full moons are often times where we're a bit more emotionally triggered or sensitive. Our emotions rise to the surface. Things that have kind of been stuffed down come to light or come to the surface to be released. And so full moons can be emotional times. And full moons can also be when relationship issues come to the forefront often as well, because we're dealing with the two luminaries, right? The quintessential sort of masculine and feminine energies. And when I say masculine and feminine, I'm not talking about gender. I'm talking about the qualities of the masculine and feminine that we all possess, right? The yin and the yang, the more active qualities of the sun and the more sort of passive receptive qualities of the moon, right? The notion of light and dark. And when I use that binary, like, we have this misguided notion that light means good and dark means bad. That is not the case. When we're talking about astrology, the planets are essentially neutral, even though we can have malefic planets and benefic planets. Like, they are not in and of themselves good and bad, right? They possess certain qualities that we might perceive as subjectively more challenging, say if you're talking about Saturn and Mars. But they can also, which are the two what we consider malefics, but they can also be very productive. It sort of depends on, how we're responding to things, how conscious we are of things, how we work with those energies, how we connect to them. Wow, the light is doing a really crazy thing. It was dark a minute ago, and now it's like the sun just broke through the clouds and it's a little bright. So I'm a little washed out right now. Anyways, we carry on. So, we're talking about this notion of the light and the dark, and that doesn't mean one is superior to the other. We need both, right? We need both sun and moon, light and dark, yin and yang, active and passive, that kind of thing. So the point is, the sun and the moon are opposite each other in the sky at a full moon. And what's happening is, as I was mentioning, the moon in this Capricorn full moon scenario is conjunct Pluto, and the sun is in the opposite sign of Cancer at 21 degrees Cancer, and the sun is conjunct Mercury, which is at 17 degrees Cancer. So we have this kind of opposition between the moon and Pluto and the sun and Mercury going on at the time of the full moon. And actually, a few days after this full moon, on the 16th of July, Mercury will conjoin the sun for the cazimi, what we call the cazimi moment, which is basically where, the sun holds counsel with Mercury, and there can be this kind of insight that happens, like a mental insight or a piece of information that comes in and, shifts the perspective, or changes your mind, or allows you to see things more clearly, right? It's this moment of clarity. In this case for Mercury, which is our thinking, our communication, our mind, that sort of thing. So that's happening a few days after this lunation, this full moon. And then on the 17th, we have Venus changing signs, moving from Gemini into Cancer, where there's a lot of activity that's been going on. Not only is the sun in Cancer, and Mercury's in Cancer, but we just had the new moon in Cancer, right? That is what initiated this lunar cycle. And the full moon that we're talking about in this video in Capricorn is that crescendo point of the cycle, right? And so we've got things happening in the Cancer area of the chart. So Venus is moving from Gemini to Cancer on the 17th, and then the following day, on the 18th, Mercury will come into an exact opposition with Pluto at 27 degrees of Capricorn, and then it will immediately move into Leo on the morning of the 19th. And so the phrase I'm going to use here is, it's like a mic drop moment, where we've got this some kind of insight, illumination, information, exchange of words, something is being presented to us or by us potentially. And it's kind of like, oh yeah, mic drop sort of thing. And the thing about it is this is flavoring what's to come, right? In some way. And I'm going to get into that a little bit more in a minute here. So, but just to finish off the transits that are happening, on the 19th, we have the sun coming into the exact opposition with Pluto in Capricorn. And on that day, Chiron in Aries stations retrograde at 16 degrees. We're not going to talk too much about that piece here because there's so much else to cover, but just to note. And then on the 22nd, we have the sun moving into the sign of Leo, and it will be Leo season. And then, of course, I will be back to talk to you about the new moon in Leo that's happening at the end of the month. And we have a lot of big energy going on around that time, but we're kind of this whole lunar cycle that began with the new moon in Cancer, where we had the square from Jupiter, and then we had, we've had Mars and Pluto, Mars in Aries and Pluto in Capricorn squaring off. That was a big, we had a lot of, if you look at the news cycle, you can kind of see the explosive events that occurred in and around there, right? So, but here in this video, we're focusing mostly on the full moon in Capricorn and the pieces that play a role there. So one of the things that's really significant, aside from what I mentioned to you in terms of the conjunctions with Pluto and Mercury, right? At the time of the full moon, we have the full moon in a very close trine to the North Node, which is in Taurus. And the North Node is in a conjunction with Uranus. Now, it's not exact, but it's like 2 degrees away. So anything 3 degrees and closer is pretty potent. That conjunction between the North Node and Uranus will happen exact on July 31st. And a conjunction between Uranus and the North Node only happens about once every 15 years or so. So this is not a regular occurrence when this happens. Uranus has been in Taurus, the sign of Taurus, since 2018. It entered on May 15th, 2018. And it has been shaking things up and destabilizing for each of us personally, the house that Taurus sits for us in our chart, right? And Taurian themes of our resources. And this is global too, of course, right? Our food supply, our economy, and the way we do money sort of thing. Getting, how we get our basic needs met, like our survival needs. All of these things are being destabilized and in some way, shape, or form innovated. There's innovation going on here as well. Although sometimes it's hard to see that, right? We tend to notice the destabilizing effects. But rest assured, there's also a response to that, which involves the innovation of certain things, technological advancements, advancements in agriculture, farming, anything related to money markets, this kind of thing. Those things are happening, right? And Uranus and Taurus will continue to shake things up until late April of 2026. So, there's like an 8-9 year transit that Uranus spends in a sign, and it's going to dip into Gemini between July and November of 2025. So we'll get a little taste then of what the Uranus in Gemini transit will bring about. But then it's going back into Taurus to finish off its journey there, and it will exit Taurus late April 2026. So we've still got a while to go, right? And we're kind of, here we are in the kind of middle of this shakeup. And we've got, at the time of this full moon, like I said, Uranus and the North Node in a conjunction, which are trine this full moon in Capricorn. Taurus and Capricorn are earth signs. They trine each other. And it's a quite a close trine. So this means that there's something about what's happening in Taurus that is supportive of the events surrounding this full moon, even though they may feel a bit destabilizing. They may, with Mercury and Pluto involved, there may be some oh, more revelations, shocking revelations, dark secrets being revealed, or really deep insights, lots of deep research sort of going on, and the uncovering or the illumination or revelations around that. And, I mean, these kinds of things have been happening for a while now. Really, it seems to be like one massive news story after the other about, the shock and awe kind of that's going on. And we can get a bit desensitized because every second day there's, something else about a shooting or, the overturning of a major piece of legislation or what have you. And so with all these sort of tragic and shocking events that are constantly happening, and of course we've all, we're still experiencing the pandemic in a very real way. It's just, we can get a bit desensitized. And I think Cancer, the sign of Cancer, and the new moon we had there in Cancer is a bit of a reminder for us to protect what's important. Cancer is the great mother, the nurturer, the protectress, and reminding us there, like I said, protect what's important, and not lose sight of our sensitivities. Because when we start to just take this very, oh yeah, well, here's another school shooting, and here's that, and we just don't stop to feel that, then we start to kind of think of it as not a big deal, or we dehumanize each other, right? Even further. So while it's important to take breaks, and we can't be feeling all the feels all the time, speaking from experience over here, we also need to nurture what's important to us, and we need to allow ourselves to be sensitive to the ebbs and flows of life, and to our human experience here. So, okay, I'm going off on a tangent that I hadn't planned on, but that's what wants to come out. So, all right. So I mentioned to you, I used the phrase a little while ago that this seemed to be a bit of a mic drop moment going on in and around this full moon. So whatever that moment is, it may be a revelation or sort of an electrical charge, right? We have Uranus involved here that launches us into the future in some way, right? We've got the North Node in conversation in a supportive way, right? Uranus is electrifying the North Node, which signifies things like, yes, the trajectory that we are on, where we are headed to, but also in some ways there can be this kind of voracious appetite for whatever the North Node is landing on at any given time. And in this case, we're talking about Taurus, and the themes revolving around Taurus, right, which I mentioned. And of course, this sits in a particular house in each of our charts. And when I talk about the full moon horoscopes, I'm going to touch on that for each of you as well. So sit tight. But so there's something about what's going on right now where Uranus, and then we're going to have Mars, which Mars is also in Taurus right now, moving towards Uranus and the North Node. So it's going to be a triple whammy kind of thing, some fireworks. And but it's like this like electrifying moment of like a waking up, and I don't mean that in a sort of a spiritual woo-woo kind of way necessarily. So just take that for what it's worth. But I feel like in some ways there is a break in the timeline. We're like, I don't know if you've ever seen the series Umbrella Academy. This just made me think of it. But we've been watching the new season. Big fans of that series in our house. And like there's something going on around this time of the full moon, and in July in general, I feel like moving into August, where we kind of have this like break from one story to the next, or a leap from one timeline to another almost, right? This quantum leap, so to speak. And Saturn, the ruler of Capricorn, is associated with time. Saturn was known as the Lord of Time, Father Time in some ways. And you can think a good analogy is, the movie Back to the Future, I'm sure, where, you've got this mad scientist, Doc Brown, who's a very Uranian character, really. And, there is a jumping of the timeline. There is a conflating of the timeline in some way where, past and future sort of intertwine and get mixed up and come together. And, so Back to the Future is a good example. Again, Umbrella Academy is a good example. So there's something in real human life going on right now that relates well to those stories, right? This sort of notion of like a sudden shift from one era to another, almost. One issue to another, one life to something completely different. So, and I don't mean to say that this is necessarily all going to happen in an instant, but sometimes it feels like that because we haven't been seeing the undertones, Pluto, the what's going on under the surface, behind the scenes, in the secret caves. You know what I mean? So sometimes it feels like things happen in an instant, but in reality, it's been brewing, right, for a while. So we have this culmination, this revelation, this release, what have you, in the Capricorn area of life. But as I said, full moons are oppositions. So we also have to consider the sign in the house that the sun is occupying, the sun and Mercury. And in this case, that's Cancer. So when I go through the horoscopes, I'm going to talk to you about that axis, right? And the Capricorn Cancer axis is the axis of the material and emotional security. Capricorn material, Cancer emotional. It's the axis of parenting, that sort of mothering and fathering sort of energy, right? Again, I'm not gendering that, but you know what I mean when I say that. It's the axis of our roots, Cancer, and our wings, Capricorn, in some way. And together, when they're at their best, Cancer and Capricorn, make a secure life. And one where we have ambitions that sort of build material security, right? The Capricorn piece, and the nurturing that allows us to feel emotionally stable and secure, the Cancer piece. So that's the axis. Capricorn marks the beginning of winter in the Northern Hemisphere, which Western tropical astrology is based on, and that's what I use. So there is this bit of a paradox to Capricorn in some ways. We've got cold, dark, hard, austere, prudent, right? Wintry weather and months. But on the other side, Capricorn marks the winter solstice, which is a return to the light, where the days start getting longer in the Northern Hemisphere. And so there is this connection between Capricorn and the natural cycle of death and rebirth, of old age and youth, right? Capricorn is concerned with initiating like practical action and with playing the long game. The key phrase or phrases for Capricorn are I use or I achieve. So we know Capricorn is associated with this sense of achievement or ambition, climbing the mountain to reach the top kind of thing. But I use is reflected in the fact that Capricorn is an earth sign, and it uses what's available to it, right? The practical material things to its advantage. Some key descriptors or some key associations, let's go through a few of those for Capricorn, are things like ambition, maturity, responsibility, tradition, determination, drive, persistence, patience, discipline, productivity, self-mastery. There is an instinctual wisdom that Capricorn possesses, which is, connected to that earth element. And as we know, if you've been around here before, you know that I like to kind of give you both sides. There is always a sort of shadow side, right, to every sign. So on the flip side, Capricorn can be impersonal and cold and authoritarian and very conservative, cruel, cynical, narrow-minded, a bit of a workaholic, somewhat miserly. So these are also descriptors of Capricorn. And I want to read you a short excerpt from an article on Jessica Davidson's site. Jessica Davidson is a writer and an astrologer, and she goes deep, and I really love her work. And I'll link to the full article below so you can check it out. But I just want to read you this piece about Capricorn. And it's the story of the myth of Capricorn, but she dives really deep into it. So Capricorn is a paradoxical sign with rulers and symbols that are also dual in nature. This creates a complex picture, but the heart of it involves the relationship between the wildness of instinct and the structure necessary for consciousness and civilization. Go too far in either direction and you're in trouble, drowning in unconscious identification with nature or crushed by a tyrannical ego. The Capricorn goat symbolizes the instincts of lust and fertility, while the sea goat represents our primordial origins in the oceans of chaos. But as a dual creature, the sea goat also unites two extremes, the abyss and the heights of the mountain. This represents the cross of matter, right? And the tethering of the soul to the body. And side note here, in, Christianity, Capricorn, season, Christmas, is when people celebrate the birth, right, of Jesus. And we think about the cross of matter. And I won't go into all the details, and I am no expert on any of that. But I think it's interesting to kind of see how all of these pieces kind of come together. And in this particular piece that Jessica Davidson writes about, there is a bringing together of all the different cultures and things that have used this symbology of the goat or the sea goat. So it's interesting. Anyways, to carry on with what she says, out of the water comes the wisdom and secrets of life, and through effort they're given form. This is a profound subject and a profound sign, much deeper than the usual materialistic descriptions of worldly success and building an empire. Although that can be part of Capricorn's path too. But the highest expression of Capricorn is about spiritualizing matter, making the body sacred by willingly entering incarnation and enduring the limitations of being in a body without being ruled by the instincts. Capricorn combines the fertility of the goat with the restriction of matter as symbolized by Saturn. The sea goat adds serpent energy combined with the intelligence of the goat. Put this together and you have the potential for self-mastery. So I'm going to leave it there. But I have talked at length about this idea of Capricorn being, very mystical in some ways, that spiritualizing of matter in past videos as well. But so this really, it goes deep, and I suggest, if you want to know more, that you read that full article, and you can really get some solid insight into Capricorn and the origins of Capricorn and the myth around Capricorn and that kind of thing. So I'm going to leave that there, though, because we need to get through to the horoscopes, right? And take it through all 12 signs. And so what I want to mention to you before we get there is that anyone with placements around 18 to 24 degrees of cardinal signs, which are Capricorn, Cancer, Aries, and Libra, will tend to feel this full moon a little more personally and potently, right? Because it will be either in a conjunction, an opposition, or a square to those placements that you have around 18 to 24 degrees of the cardinal signs. So, and there is this tension between the Cancer and Capricorn themes, which we've spoken about here, and the houses, right? Whatever houses Cancer and Capricorn sit for you, and the themes that those houses speak to, that's where this interplay will be for you specifically. And there is also some association with whatever has been and is continuing to be destabilized or revolutionized or innovated in some way in the Taurus area, right, of your chart. So we're going to speak to that as well. A shaking up of the sort of unshakable. Taurus is a fixed earth sign. When we get Uranus in Taurus, it is like trying to move the immovable, right? And so it's like earth rumbling events that happen. That shake the very foundations. And we can see that that's exactly what's going on in the world. So, there is this shaking up, like I said, of the unshakable in the name of progress, right? We've got the North Node there in Taurus, in order to grow, but hopefully not out of control, which can sometimes happen with the North Node. And we also, I think it's important for me to remind you that, of course, the North Node is opposite the South Node, and the South Node is in the sign of Scorpio right now, right? The North and South Nodes are what mark the eclipses, and we've had eclipses in Taurus and Scorpio, and we'll have more in the fall. But as the full moon trines the North Node and Uranus, it's also in a sextile with the South Node and the Sun. So there can be this element of, a purging or letting go or a release or a detachment. Those are all things related to the South Node happening in the Scorpio area of our chart. But I'm not going to speak to that in this because that just gets too complicated. If you want to know more about what's happening on that axis in terms of the eclipses, which are an 18-month to 2-year cycle that we're in right now, you can go back and watch my videos on the past eclipses, the past eclipse season that we just had in the spring. And then, of course, I'll do more videos in the fall when we get closer to that next eclipse chapter, shall we say. So we're going to take it through the signs now. We're going to speak to the axis of the full moon. So specifically the house that Capricorn sits for you. We're going to focus on that house, and we're going to speak to the axis, right? Because the sun is across the sky in Cancer, as is Mercury at the time of the full moon. And we're just going to note the house that Taurus is in as well. So you can have a bit of a heads up, like be a little bit tweaked to that, because we're moving towards that exact conjunction between Uranus and the North Node, and Mars is coming in there too, right? So start paying attention what's going on there around the time of the full moon. But in the Capricorn house, it's where we will feel this release, this crescendo, this illumination, this revelation of sorts, right? All right, so let's get to it. And we're going to start with Capricorn, because this is your full moon, and that's the way I like to do things. And before I dive in, I just want to remind you all that these horoscopes are based on Western tropical zodiac. I use whole sign houses, and I recommend you listen for your rising sign first and foremost. These are rising sign horoscopes. They will be the most accurate and reflective of your experience if you listen for your rising sign first. But you can also listen for your sun sign, definitely. That will give you some added insight. And you can listen for your moon sign as well. People with night charts, so people who are born during the night, they sometimes associate more with their moon sign. The moon is the luminary, the sect light, we call it. So, if you know that about your chart, if you know you're born at night, then you might want to pay more attention to your moon sign. But you can listen for your sun and your moon, but definitely for your rising sign. And if you don't know your rising sign, then I remind you that, you can have a look at my course, which is an on-demand course. It's fairly simple. It's priced very affordably, and it can help you sort all that out for yourself and for your own chart. Okay, so let's take it through the signs. Capricorn, you obviously have this full moon in your sign. So if you're a Capricorn rising, this is happening in your first house. And the first house is all about you. Whatever happens in the first house has an impact on everything else, because it literally speaks to you and your physical incarnation in this, lifetime. So it's about your physical vitality, your body. So issues around health can be presented here, and appearance even. We're talking about how you approach the world, how you kind of come at the world, because the first house represents our entrance into this life. So it speaks to that, how the world perceives you. It is the, what we sometimes call the helm of the ship. So it's kind of how you steer yourself through life, the trajectory that you're on. And so, of course, events that happen in the first house tend to be quite significant. And so with a full moon in your first house, there is some kind of a culmination going on here, a release, an ending, a crescendo, a leveling up, an insight that has a direct impact on you in some way, shape, or form, right? Or maybe this is something you initiate even. But you've got the moon in your first house, and opposite that, and you've got the moon conjunct Pluto there, right? Let's not forget that. So this can be something rather profound and deep and revelatory, when it happens. And you've got the sun across the sky in Cancer conjunct Mercury, which is, in your seventh house of the other, or your close personal relationships. This can be significant other, this can be business partners, close friends and family member, even rivals. And it can also, the seventh house speaks to contracts and agreements as well. So, and the seventh house is also sometimes associated with endings, or later in life kind of things as well. But this full moon is on the axis of relationship. So there's something transpiring here in that arena for you, and it may involve you and a significant other. There may be some, because of the involvement of Pluto and Mercury, there may be, again, some revelatory information or communications or insights. Mercury can sometimes be it's associated with movement and moving parts or short journeys. That may come into play in some way around the time of this full moon, and some form of there is a depth to what's going on here because of that Pluto piece, right? And then you've got Mars in Taurus in your fifth house. So, Mars, the North Node Uranus, and Mars is there too, and eventually we'll come into that conjunction, right? But I spoke about this North Node Uranus conjunction in the intro at some length, so definitely don't skip that. But this is where Uranus has been shaking things up for you since about 2018, and will continue to do so through to 2026. But we're at a point here where there is like I said, like an almost like a jumping of the timeline happening. Something is shifting in a big way, and it involves fifth house themes of children. So it could be something revolving around your children or children you're somehow associated with. There are things potentially having to do with pleasure pursuits, right? Like how you have fun in life, the things you do for fun and pleasure. Romance can be fifth house thing, creativity, any of your creative projects or pursuits, hobbies, special interests, sports. These are all fifth house themes, but often very associated with children if this is relevant for you. If not, it's something, having to do with those other things that I mentioned. So there's shakeups going on here, right? And this is a moment in time where there can be a real, like I said, a mic drop moment that goes on. And it somehow has to do with, what's happening in the Taurus area, which is in a supportive conversation. Let's not forget that with this full moon, even though it may be destabilizing, revolutionary, those Uranian words. There's something about this that's supportive. So don't lose sight of that, even if you're feeling the rumblings, And then again, just to take it back to the actual full moon in your sign, a big crescendo moment, a release point, maybe something quite emotional. You may be quite emotional around this time, with a full moon in your first house. And there can be something like a big emotional release for you that shifts your trajectory in some way, that causes you to be seen in a different light in some way, that shifts your like a significant relationship in your life in some way. Something around that is brought to light, So these are all things to be looking for you, Capricorn rising, around the time of this full moon. And I'd love to know, your own experience if you're willing to share. And you can leave me a comment below. And, if you have a question or a comment, then please leave below. And I try to respond to everybody. It doesn't always happen right away. It sort of depends on where things are at for me, but I do eventually get to them. So please, don't hesitate to do that. Okay. So I'm going to leave that there for you, Capricorn. I'm going to move on to Sagittarius next, because Sagittarius rising, this full moon is coming to, this crescendo moment in your second house of your personal resources, meaning your money, your finances, your time and your energy are also personal resources. This is sorry, I have a really itchy nose. There's a stray hair, I think. There is a connection here to how you get your basic needs met in the second house. Oftentimes this involves like how we make money to buy the things that we need, the food and shelter and things like this, right? So there's a full moon moment happening here. The second house can also speak to what you value and place worth on, and also in some ways like your own self-worth, right? How you value yourself. So there is something going on here that is being illuminated, revealed, coming to this word crescendo always comes to mind when I think of a full moon, coming up for release, that kind of thing. It might be quite emotional because it is a full moon revolving around those topics. And it also brings in the 8th house, because we've got the sun and Mercury in Cancer across the sky in the 8th house. So the 8th house is about other people's resources, other people's money, time, energy. And it's an area where we feel like we don't necessarily have a lot of control, right? And this can be about our intimate entanglements with other people and what all of the baggage that brings with it. So something about this axis of resources is being lit up for you around the time of this full moon, and the connection between your resources and other people's resources, and your entanglements with other people, right? So this could be like a source of income, could be somehow revealed, illuminated. It could be coming to a close, or shifting in some way. How you're getting your basic needs met can be, there's something being illuminated around that, and your entanglement with other people and their resources in some way, right? There is something that comes to mind on this axis for me too, is this idea of how, like, the eighth house speaks to the cycle of kind of, death and rebirth. And sometimes that can impact our resources. Like, and I'm thinking about things like wills, inheritance, that kind of thing, which may pertain to some people. Of course, not everyone, but, so there may be something revolving around those sorts of themes going on for you, Sagittarius. And there is this energy in Taurus in your sixth house, where we've got Uranus coming into a conjunction with the North Node, Mars also in there that will eventually meet up with Uranus and the North Node too, right? We talked about a bit of the fireworks potential for that, and the jumping of the timeline and all that in the intro. So don't skip that. But this sort of revolutionary energy, this destabilizing, radical, shock and awe, innovative, freedom-seeking energy is all happening in your sixth house, which has to do with things like the work you do on the day-to-day, which can be paid or unpaid work, right? It's like the daily grind, the daily slog kind of thing. So something involving around work, something that involves your routines around health and wellness, or illness, in some way, shape, or form. The sixth house can involve pets as well. There can be, if that's relevant for you, there is this whole, the sixth house can feel a bit like drudgery in a sense, because it is this, how we are in service, right? And the work that we put in that we don't always get accolades for or recognized for to the degree that we should, or at all. It is, way back when the sixth house was connected to slavery. So, in these times, we can think of it as being like a slave to the job or the daily grind or something like that, or to some kind of like illness or health issue. And so there is, or if you're somebody that, deals with pets in some way, small animals, this can pertain to you as well. Again, that will definitely not be for everybody, but there's something going on here. There's a need for breaking free, for something being destabilized, shaken up here. Like I said, like a quantum leap potential going on in this area of life for you. Uranus is there for, till 2026, and the North Node is still there for another kind of year. So this is not like a flash in the pan kind of energy, but it might feel like that at moments like this, because there's a real amplification of that energy, right? But I want to remind you before I close out that it is this Uranus North Node conjunction. Whatever's happening here is it's in support of the full moon, of the events of the full moon, because it's in a trine. And a trine is a supportive aspect of the nature of Jupiter, right? So there's opportunity for growth and abundance and expansion and optimism here in some way. Okay. All right, I'm going to leave that there for you, Sagittarius. I'm going to move to Scorpio now, where Scorpio, this full moon is happening in your third house of your local community, of the people and things that are in your immediate environment. So we can think of things and people like siblings, peers, teammates, even like friends that feel like siblings, community members. The third house is about sort of our daily rituals, not in the way of the sixth house where it's like work. This is like rituals that are more like have a sense of like what's the word I'm looking for? It's escaping me right now, but it'll come to me. And when it does, I'll jump in and let you know. But our daily rituals, sacredness, that's the word I'm looking for, that have a sense of sacredness about them. They're meaningful to us in some way. The third house can be about, it's a very busy place. It can be about things like our communications, teaching, learning, our things that have to do with technology, the vehicles of communication, moving parts, vehicles, commerce, marketing, all of these things are third house related. So something having to do with some of those themes is, for you personally, Scorpio rising is being illuminated, is coming to a point of release or culmination or bearing fruit or some kind of revelation. I don't know if I used that word yet, and it's somehow connected to the ninth house, which is where Cancer and Mercury are sitting right across the sky, where, the Sun and Mercury are sitting in Cancer across the sky. And the ninth house is about the quest that you're on. And this is, I want to give credit where credit's due. I got a lot of insight into the third ninth house axis a little while back, listening to an episode of the Astrology podcast, and I heard Austin Coppock refer to the third house as the ritual and the ninth house as the quest, and it's like light bulbs were going off for me. So the ninth house is the expansion of our horizons. It is long distance, travel and people in places far away and what we can learn from different cultures and different people. It is our worldview, our philosophy. It has to do with higher education, potentially justice, the big picture and big ideas, So it's what's out there as opposed to what's close to home, which is the third house. And so we've got something going on this axis of what's known as the axis of the mind and communication, but it's so much bigger than that. There's a culmination point, like I said, involving this axis for you around this time. So there may be something coming to light around a communication coming in that has something to do with like siblings or those folks that I mentioned that are significations of the third house, something around education, something around short travel involved here. And then we've got Taurus in your seventh house, which is where Uranus and the North Node are coming into a conjunction, and eventually Mars as well, right? And so that is some destabilization, some shakeups, some shifts, changes, freedom, urge for freedom, innovation, all happening in relation to your close personal relationships. So significant other, this could be in the life of a significant other or person that you're close to in some way, business partnerships in the seventh house, contracts and agreements in the seventh house, rivals, these are all seventh house themes. And so there is something going on here, that Uranus is disrupting between 2018 and 2026, but we're at a point where it's real, like there's a jump in the timeline, a quantum leap, like I was saying in the intro. right? And so, but whatever this is in support. It's in a supportive conversation, a trine with the full moon. So there's something happening here in the Taurus seventh house that's supporting the release, the culmination, the leveling up, the moving on to the next chapter, um, the bearing of fruit in that third house that I was speaking about. So there's something here like that may be about communication and your partner in some way, or technology, and your partner or your close relationships or business relationships or contract, these sorts of things. So I could go further and further as always, but I think that gives you enough to go on, Scorpio. So I will leave that there for you, and I'm going to move on to Libra now. So Libra, for you, you've got the full moon culminating in your fourth house, which is the house of home, family, ancestry, roots, your emotional security, these kinds of things. Parents, oftentimes associated with sort of the more nurturing parent, but parents in general. So place of living, I don't know if I said that, real estate matters. So for you, Libra, this is where the crescendo moment of the full moon is happening, this release, this culmination, this perhaps a bit of emotional sensitivity in some way, or some kind of a bearing of fruit, is happening here in the fourth house. And it's somehow related to what's going on in your 10th house, because you've got the sun and Mercury in Cancer in your 10th house across the sky from the moon and Pluto, right? So the 10th house is your public life, the legacy you wish to leave, authority and authority figures. It can be about your own sense of authority in the world. So the private life and the public life are kind of, needing to come to some agreement in some way. The legacy you have been left, the legacy you wish to leave, your home family roots versus your ambitions kind of thing. So there's some tension going on here. And there's a culmination happening in that fourth house, a revelation of sorts. And it can be quite profound because we've got Pluto conjunct the moon, as I mentioned in the intro, right? So the other piece that I said I would speak to is Uranus and the North Node coming into conjunction. And for you, that's in the 8th house, Taurus. And we also have Mars in there that will meet up with Uranus and the North Node later on as well. So, there can be some fireworks happening or some sense of jumping the timeline, like I've been saying, or like a shakeups, disruptions, shock and awe moments, need for innovation, breaking free, all of these themes going on in your 8th house. So Uranus has been in there destabilizing things since about 2018 and will continue to do so until 2026. But we're at a moment of amplification around all of that. And so for you, that involves themes of 8th house themes of other people's resources. Practically, this can be things like taxes, debt, insurance, wills, loans, partners' income. It can have to do with inheritance, bursaries, scholarships, anything along those lines that pertains to other people's resources. It's about your intimate entanglements and connections with other people, and all of the baggage that entails. It's about the 8th house is like a feeling. It can be an area where we're feeling like we don't have a lot of control over things, and we're at the mercy of other people or other forces, so to speak, right? And so there can be a sense of having to surrender the eighth house can be associated with the cycle of like transformation or death and rebirth, if you will. So there's something going on there. And again, coming to this sort of point of amplification around the time of the new moon, full moon rather. But keep in mind that, you know, the eighth house can have some darker themes to it, or a little bit more like tense significations. But whatever's happening is in support of the full moon because it's in a trine. And a trine is a supportive conversation, right? Trines are of the nature of Jupiter. So there's some level of potential expansion, optimism, growth, abundance, you know, luck kind of thing, that justice that can be happening around the time of this full moon. So those things are working together, the home, family, roots piece, right? And these eighth house themes in some way, and whatever's transpiring there for you. So I think that gives you enough to go on, Libra. And when you listen to the intro, you'll get even further insight. So please don't forget to do that. And I'll move on to Virgo now, where Virgo, for you, the full moon is reaching a crescendo in your fifth house. Excuse me. So there is something coming to light here. A bearing of fruit is happening, a release. All those full moon potentials are happening for you, revolving around fifth house themes of children. So your children, usually, but it can be other children that you're associated with. It can have to do with what brings you joy, what brings you pleasure in life, your creative pursuits, you know, creative projects, like how you kind of shine your light out in the world, hobbies, special interests, that kind of thing, right? Are fifth house related as well. Issues around, I mentioned children, but we can also think of things like, you know, pregnancy and things surrounding that. So this is a full moon moment, and in Capricorn, which is fifth house for you, and it's in conjunction with Pluto. It can be profound. There can be depth. There can be, in some cases, you know, darkness. You know, Pluto is that underworld energy, and that sort of titanic kind of atomic energy, if you will, right? And Pluto's lord of the underworld. Then across the sky, you've got Mercury and the Sun in the 11th house. So it brings in this house, the 11th house, this axis of the self and the group, the individual, which is the fifth house, versus sort of the group, which is the 11th house, the collective, right? Collaborations, that kind of thing. So also, I like to say sometimes the 11th house is your kids' friends. I always bring that in because I've seen it so many times that it feels to me like it's a definite signification that nobody talks about. But anyway, so something going on this axis for you, and there can be communications, there can be, you know, because Mercury is involved in conjunction with the Sun and opposite Pluto and the Moon. So there can be something involving like a short trips, or again, I said communications, messages exchanged, revelations of sorts. Sorry, I have a tickle in my throat. So, or there may be like some kind of an emotional release involving fifth house themes that I just mentioned to you as well, because full moons can be quite emotional. The other thing to keep in mind is that we've got Uranus and the North Node in a conjunction in Taurus, which for you is your 9th house. And Mars is also in there, right? And so there's been some shakeup, some destabilization, some innovation happening in that 9th house for you, because Uranus has been moving through there since 2018 and will continue to do so until 2026, like we spoke about in the intro. But we're at a moment of amplification of that. And so there's some revelation, shakeup, jumping of the timeline, going on, like sudden break, from one story to the next in some way, related to your ninth house, which is like the quest that you're on in some way. It has to do with foreign people and places, and what you can learn from people different from you. It's about like your worldview, and it's about higher education. It can be about justice and religion, even in the ninth house. It can be about expanding your horizons in some way, right? So that notion of the quest, that I borrowed from Austin Coppock. So something is happening, is being amplified there in that ninth house, and it's in support of the full moon because it's in a trine to the full moon. There's growth, expansion, knowledge being gained, perhaps some kind of cause for optimism, and because a trine is of the nature of Jupiter, and it's somehow supporting what's happening in the fifth house, the release, the culmination, the bearing of fruit, the revelation, the illumination, right? Around those fifth house themes. So putting all those pieces together, Virgo rising, what does this look like in your own life? Give that some thought. There's so many scenarios that could play out that have to do with all of these themes. But there seems to be for you a full moon moment involving potentially your kids or your creative projects or your creative self-expression or your pleasure pursuits, this kind of thing. All right, so I'm going to leave that there for you, Virgo, and I'm going to move on to Leo now, where Leo, you have the full moon culminating in your sixth house. So sixth house, right? You got a full moon moment happening there, a release, a revelation, an illumination, a bearing of fruit, something coming to fruition that has to do with your daily work, whether it be paid or unpaid. The daily grind, so to speak. It can have to do around with things around illness and health, around pets in the sixth house, how you are in service. So, sometimes the sixth house is related to kind of like thankless work in some ways. It's not always, glamorous, but there is a moment here where, again, there's a culmination being reached, and there's a connection. This can be quite profound because there's a connection with Pluto and the moon conjunct at the time of this lunation. And across the sky, you've got Mercury and Cancer in your 12th house, right? With the sun. So this is the axis of your daily order and the escape from that daily grind in some ways, for your routines and responsibilities, and how you are in service, and the nose to the grindstone stuff you have to do, and how you remove yourself from that, or are removed from that, or you escape that, or how you spend time away from that in some way, right? And the 12th house. The 12th house can be about our blind spots, like what we're not seeing, sort of right in front of us. It can be about escape from daily routine, and that can be through all kinds of ways, from like anything from vacations and retreats to things like somehow being related to institutions like hospitals and rehab facilities and things like that, right? The 12th house can be related to things we're not seeing in plain sight. So things that are going on behind the scenes or even in the subconscious. So there's something going on here on the 6th, 12th axis, and there's an illumination point at the time of this full moon of the 6th house and what's happening there around those themes. And then you have this interesting placement, actually, to me, for you, Leo rising, of Uranus and the North Node. And Mars is also now entered Taurus. shaking things up in your area of your worldly ambitions, right? The 10th house, your career, the legacy you wish to leave, your public life, your relationship to authority and authority figures. So there's something going on here. Uranus has been sort of destabilizing, revolutionizing that area of life for you since 2018 and will continue to do so until 2026. But we're at a moment of amplification. I keep saying to every sign, where there's like a jumping of the timeline in some way, right? I spoke to that notion at greater length in the intro, so don't skip that. But where there's like a break from one story to the next. And in some ways, it may seem like it comes about all of the sudden, but it doesn't really, because things have been transpiring and going on. So there's a connection here. I can see this very much for you, Leo. There's maybe something for a lot of Leos going on revolving around work and career at the time of this full moon, but keeping in mind that what's happening in the Taurus house, like the North Node Uranus conjunction, is in a trine, a supportive conversation with this full moon. So there's support happening. There's something easy flowing happening, right? Trines are of the nature of Jupiter, something expansive happening, maybe fortunate happening that's connected somehow to this full moon energy. So put all those pieces together as they pertain to your own life experience, and you can get a sense of what to look for, right? And where to focus your energy around the time of this full moon, and with that Uranus North Node piece going on for you in the 10th house. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to mention to you, Leo. There may be something going on as well for some Leos that has to do with health in some way, health and wellness. It may not be pertaining to you specifically, but that may be in your sphere somehow, right? Involving other people that you are associated with, potentially. So, or if you're somebody that works in that kind of an atmosphere, in a health setting or something like that as well, there may be things going on around the time of the full moon that pertain to that. Okay. All right, I'm going to leave that there for you, Leo, Leo rising. And I'm going to move on to Cancer now, because we still have quite a bit to go here. So we are talking about the full moon in your 7th house for you, Cancer. That's where the culmination of the full moon is happening. And so for you, that has to do with your one-to-one close relationships. So this can be your significant other, close friends, family members, business associates, contracts and agreements, rivals, are all 7th house. Sometimes when things transpire in the 7th house, it's actually more about what's going on in the life of a partner, if that pertains to you, right? But this is the axis of relationship. You've got the moon and Pluto in your 7th house of the other. So like this profound revelation going on, illumination here, and the sun and Mercury in your 1st house, right, of you and your physical incarnation, how you approach the world, how the world perceives you, your vitality, your physical appearance. These are all things, the trajectory that you're on, that the 1st house speaks to. So sun is there, moon is in the 7th house. That there is some full moon moment that revolves around relationship in some way, you and another in your life. And so the other piece to keep in mind is that we've got Uranus and the North Node in a conjunction in Taurus. And Mars is also in Taurus, moving also towards like a triple conjunction, right? A bit of fireworks there. And this is happening in your 11th house. So for you, this disruption, this innovation, this revelation is happening. This urge for freedom has to do with 11th house themes of the group, your allies, your supporters, friendship groups, networks, your hopes and dreams for the future, people that can help you on your trajectory in some way. and support you. Sometimes 11th house speaks to our kids' friends as well. And so some shakeups are happening here. And this is a real moment of amplification in that realm because of the Uranus North Node and eventually Mars conjunction happening there. And I spoke more to the details of that in the intro. But this, whatever this is that's transpiring in the 11th house, is in support of what's happening, of the full moon moment, because it's in a trine, right? So, like there's something going on with a group, with an ally, supporter, that can be like, couldn't be a sudden shift, change, something like that. But it is supporting this axis of you and the other. And that culmination might be, there might be an emotional catharsis of some sort. Full moons are sometimes associated with that, with you and a significant other in a relationship of some kind, right? An important relationship. There may be a moment of emotional catharsis there. Deep communication, like things like this, I can see the potential for. So, okay, Cancer, I'm going to leave that there for you, and I'm going to move on to Gemini now, where Gemini, the full moon for you is happening in your 8th house. So culminating in the 8th house, which has to do with other people's resources. It's about other people's money, time, and energy. Your intimate entanglements with other people. The 8th house can speak to where we can feel like we're not really in control. We're not driving the bus, right? We're at the mercy of other people, at the mercy of, things that are greater than us in some way. And on a practical level, this can be about things like debt, insurance, taxes, loans, bursaries, mortgages, inheritance, wills, anything like that. So the full moon is culminating here. There's a crescendo, there's a release, there's an emotional catharsis, a revelation, a profound moment of revelation, because Pluto is connected here, right, in conjunction with the moon. And then opposite the sun and Mercury in the 2nd house. So this is the axis of resources. Your resources, which would be the 2nd house piece, your money, time, energy, your sense of worth, what you place worth on, including yourself, and then other people's resources, right, in the 8th house. So this is the axis of form, which is the 2nd house piece, and transformation, right, in the 8th house. So some full moon moment happening here on this axis. And there is a connection to the 12th house, because Uranus in Taurus is coming into a conjunction with the North Node in Taurus in your 12th house at the time of this full moon. And then Mars is also coming in there and will also join that techno party at the end of the month. This conjures up images of like flashing lights and, a rave kind of thing, with the pyrotechnics and whatever else. But that Uranus North Node Mars conjunction. But the 12th house, where this Uranus North Node conjunction is happening for you, right? So there's an amplification of whatever has been being destabilized for you since 2018, which will carry on to 2026. But we're at an amplification moment here. And that has to do with 12th house themes. So what does the 12th house speak to? It speaks to the unseen, the hidden, things that go on behind closed doors. It speaks to endings. It speaks to subconscious happenings, things that are like, it can be secrets or things that are hidden from us, or that we're hiding from ourselves even. Can speak to your spiritual life, your dream life. It can speak to in a practical sense. Institutions like hospitals, hospices, long-term care facilities, spiritual retreat centers, rehab facilities, these kinds of things. Or how you retreat in some way, time in solitude, time on vacation, time on retreat, even any of those things, right? So there's something going on here. There's a amplification, a jump in the timeline, a break from one story to the next. And I spoke about all of that in greater detail in the intro. But this is in support somehow of what's happening at the full moon in the 8th house culmination that's taking place. There is a supportive element going on here because the Uranus North Node piece is in trine with the full moon, right? And that is a supportive conversation. So I feel like for Gemini and Gemini rising, it can feel tricky because these are like 8th house, 12th house. Like these are not really necessarily all good times, houses we're talking about. There can be some really deep, difficult themes, right? I don't want to sugarcoat it, that come up. But there is something supportive here in the end. Whatever the jump in the timeline is, like I keep using the mic drop moment, right? I used that in the intro as well. There's something supportive about whatever is trying to be released or culminated at the time of the full moon here for you. So, put those pieces together, Gemini, and what does that mean for you personally, right? Okay, so I'm going to move on from Gemini to Taurus now. Taurus, for you, the full moon is culminating in your 9th house. And this is a moment where you have potentially a revelation, something's bearing fruit, something's coming up for release, some kind of a catharsis moment that has to do with 9th house themes of the quest that you're on, that has to do with the expansion of your horizons, your worldview, your politics, your people in places that are different from you, at a distance, even like sometimes long distance travel is associated with this house. We can be talking about things like higher education, publishing, speaking, teaching, justice, religion. These are all 9th house themes. But there's this notion of like the expansion of horizons in some way. And the quest, to borrow a term from Austin Coppock in relation to the 9th house. So that's where this culmination is happening, and it's connected somehow to the Sun and Mercury that are in your 3rd house across from the Moon and Pluto. So profound revelations can happen, right? And for you, there's something here that may have to do with education in some way, or communication, or thinking and perception. Because the 3rd house is also a house of communication, the mind, but it's about our immediate environment and our sort of daily rituals that are like the sacred rituals that we, perform on the day-to-day, meaningful rituals. 3rd house can be about siblings, community, people that feel like siblings in some way, cousins, that kind of thing. Commerce, marketing, these are all 3rd house significations. So something on this axis of the mind, of communication, that is coming to a culmination at the time of the full moon for you. And then we cannot forget, and you for sure can't forget, because Taurus, for you, you've got the North Node and Uranus and now Mars in Taurus, if you're a Taurus rising, in your 1st house, right? If you're a Taurus sun, in your sign. So this is big energy. There is, Uranus has been traveling, like I spoke about in the intro, through your sign since 2018, shaking things up there. The North Node is now there where we're having eclipses, and Mars is moving in there. So the North Node and Uranus are conjuncting at the time of this full moon, but they're in a supportive conversation with the full moon, with whatever the full moon is about. This Uranus North Node combo in Taurus is actually supporting that, in some way. But it may feel quite revelatory, but it's, there may be like some kind of like like a jumping the timeline. I feel like a mic drop moment that goes on, a sudden shift in the Taurus house. And it has to do with, if you're Taurus rising, yourself, your physical body, and vitality, your appearance, potentially, your how you come at the world, how the world perceives you, your general trajectory in life. And there can be a real moment, like a kind of disruptive moment, but somehow it's supporting what's happening here in the ninth house and on this third house axis that I just spoke to. So I see, when I look at the houses involved for you, Taurus, there may be something around travel, around education, around worldview shifting in some way, being destabilized in some way. But again, there's like that destabilization is somehow supporting the culmination of the full moon, the catharsis that's happening in the ninth house for you, Taurus. So I'm going to leave that there for you. And I'm losing my voice. So I'm going to move on to Aries, where Aries, you've got the full moon culminating in your 10th house. So for you, Aries, there's a catharsis, a turning point, a revelation, a release, a bearing of fruit, a culmination in your 10th house of career, public life, the legacy you wish to leave, authority figures, your own authority in the world, your public reputation in some way. And this is directly connected. And there's the Pluto is conjunct the moon at the time, right? Remember, I spoke about this in the intro. Don't skip the intro. So this can be quite profound. And there is an opposition between the moon and the sun, obviously, because it's a full moon, but also Mercury, which is with the sun in Cancer, in your 4th house of home, family, roots, ancestry, place of living, your emotional security, whereas 10th is your material security. And, so these themes are involved here as well. And then we've also got Taurus, the Taurus piece, which I spoke to in the intro as well, where you've got Uranus and the North Node in a conjunction at the time of this full moon. And Mars is in Taurus as well, also going to meet up with the North Node and Uranus eventually. So there is an amplification of the changes, the destabilization, the disruption, the innovation, the freedom-seeking urge, all those Uranian type words that have been going on in your 2nd house of your resources, your money, your time, your energy, your sense of self-worth, getting your basic needs met, what you value, are all 2nd house themes. And so this has been on shaky ground, because Uranus has been in there destabilizing things since 2018 and will continue to do so until 2026. But we're at a moment of amplification of that. And somehow this, whatever this is, this disruption in Taurus is actually working in harmony with the culmination of the full moon moment in Capricorn for you in your 10th house, if you're an Aries rising. So, again, like I was saying in the intro, like I feel like there's this kind of mic drop moment, this jumping of the timeline that's happening in some way. And for you, that involves 10th house, 4th house, 2nd house themes, right? I can see like things like some kind of real estate situation going on, something involving your career and your your resources, your monetary resources, something like maybe a career, some culmination or a leveling up somehow, that somehow involves a shift in your resources, right? So think about what's going on in your own life, Aries rising, and how this can apply to you and your situation. Those are the themes to watch for, and the houses to pay attention to around the time of this full moon, and as we move through the rest of July and into August. So I'm going to leave that there for you, Aries. I'm going to move on to Pisces now, where Pisces, for you, the full moon's culminating in your 11th house. Just going to take a sip of water before I move on. Okay, so Pisces, a crescendo, a release, a catharsis, a leveling up, a bearing of fruit, happening in your 11th house of your allies and supporters, your hopes and dreams for the future, your friendship groups, connections, networks, potentially having something to do with your kids' friends in some way. 11th house themes, right? And this is opposite. So the moon and Pluto are in that 11th house. So we spoke to that in the intro. So this is a profound release of some sort of culmination or, leveling up or what have you. And it's also opposite the sun and Mercury in Cancer in your 5th house. So these themes come into play of this axis of the other versus the self, collaborations versus your individual sort of contributions and creations, right? So 5th house is children, how you have fun in life, what brings you pleasure, your creative pursuits, this kind of thing. And something along this axis is being stirred up at this full moon. But then we've got the Uranus North Node conjunction in Taurus in your 3rd house, right? And we spoke at greater length in the intro about this. Mars is also in Taurus and will move also into a conjunction with Uranus in the North Node later on and really bring some fireworks there. But pay attention to what's going on there right now because it's important, and it is in harmony with whatever's happening at the time of this full moon. It's in harmony with the full moon because it's in a trine. And so the disruption, right? Uranus has been disrupting things in your 3rd house since 2018, will continue to do so until 2026. But we're reaching an amplification point of that disruption. And that disruption for you involves, or that freedom-seeking urge, or that, those Uranian words of revelation, innovation, revolution even, in your 3rd house of your community, your siblings, and people that kind of are on that same level as siblings. It could be cousins, it could be peers, friends that feel like siblings. This can have to do with communications, with school in some way, shape, or form. It can have to do with moving parts and short jaunts, commutes or short trips, commerce, marketing. All of these have to do with the 3rd house. The 3rd house is a very busy place. It's about our daily rituals that often have like a meaning to us, right? A sense of meaning. And so something like these things have been disrupted for you. And at the time of the full moon, there is, and moving through the rest of July and into August, there's this jolt that's happening in that area. It's really being amplified, but it's somehow there is a support between the release or the culmination in the 11th house and the 11th, 5th house axis and the 3rd house disruption. Somehow there's something working together here. In your case, Pisces rising. So think about, what's going on in your life in relation to those themes, and how, track that and see how this potential disruption is actually somehow working in harmony with the full moon moment. Okay. There's a million scenarios that come to mind, but I'm not going to go down that road because we're at past an hour and a half here. But if you have questions or comments for me, leave them in the comments below, and I'll definitely address them. Okay, for you and for anybody. So I'm going to move on now to last but not least. In this scenario, we've got Aquarius. So Aquarius, the full moon in Capricorn is coming to a culmination in your 12th house. And that speaks to a lot of complex things, but it is like how you retreat from the world. That can be spending time in solitude, intentionally or unintentionally. It has to do with escape from sort of the daily routine, right? And so how you are removed from sort of the daily routine in some way. It can be about escapism. It can be about secrets and things like our blind spots, things that we're not recognizing or seeing or we're not aware of. It can have to do with things brewing in our unconscious, our spiritual life, our dream world. We can be talking about, in a practical sense, things like retreats or vacations or spending time in solitude somehow. And sometimes this can be through, there's things like rehab facilities or hospitals or things like that. We also see in the 12th house sometimes. So there's some culmination here that's happening for you at the time of the full moon, a catharsis, a release, a things coming to fruition, a leveling up, an illumination. And it's related to these 12th house themes. And then we've got the Pluto and the moon conjunct there at the time of this full moon. So it can be quite profound with Pluto there. But also you've got Mercury and the sun across the sky in the 6th house of your daily grind, your daily routine, issues around illness and health, around pets sometimes, around the daily work that you do, whether it's paid or unpaid, right? And so this is being brought into the equation somehow because there is this opposition of the sun and the moon and Mercury and Pluto. So I spoke to the intricacies of all of this in the intro, so don't skip the intro. And keep in mind that you've got Uranus and the North Node, and now Mars in Taurus in your 4th house. So since 2018, Uranus has been destabilizing or shaking things up in your 4th house of home, family, real estate, your emotional security, parenting, your roots, ancestry, these kinds of things, the legacy you have been left. So there's been some shakeups going on there. And now at the time of this full moon, we have like this moment of amplification of this energy because Uranus and the North Node are in a conjunction, and then Mars is moving in there too. So there's like I was saying in the intro, there seems to be this kind of like a mic drop moment or a jumping of the timeline happening here. And somehow the 4th house themes are involved, and they're in support. Whatever that disruption, revelation, urge for freedom, shake up, rebellion, these are Uranian words, revolution, any of those Uranian words, whatever that is that's happening in your 4th house is in support of the full moon for you because it's in a trine, right? And trines are of the nature of Jupiter. They are supportive conversations, easy flowing conversations. So there can be this simultaneous like feeling of disruption, but also there's something good coming of it in some way. So think about all of that and apply it to your own personal situation and what's going on and see how that fits for you. And if you have any questions or comments about that, then leave those below, and I will get back to you on that. Personal stories or just things that you're wondering about, that kind of thing. I'd love to hear about it. So yeah, Aquarius, full moon in the 12th, and then that conjunction in the 4th house. for you. And of course, bringing in the 6th house, right, where the Sun and Mercury is as well. So I'm going to leave that there. Thanks for sticking with me here. You can find me over at my website, astrologymaven.com, and I will be back with your horoscopes for the new moon in Leo, which happens on July 28th. All right. Take good care. Bye for now.